My name is James Hicks, and this is my collection of African American artifacts here at the Hoover Library-Museum in West Branch, Iowa. And I began collecting it back in 1992 on a trip to an antique shop looking for a coat rack. I stumbled on my first piece of Black Americana, which was a book called Watermelon Pete, and that started my collecting. This wall, you have a collage of different photographs of African Americans. Martin Luther King, Bill Cosby, Rap Brown, and a Civil War soldier. This section here is dedicated to antebellum period and pre-Civil War. We have a Liberator newspaper from 1859, which was put out by Quaker abolition societies, which were the only people who really spoke for African Americans at that time in history. We have a pillowcase, pillow cover, which I believe was made by a slave mid-1800s. And in the case, we have various books and documents. We have a slave document from Kentucky selling a girl, Negro girl, 8 years old, into a life of slavery. One book in this case which really piqued my interest was the slave narrative of Charles Ball. He was a free man living in Maryland. He was kidnapped and taken south. He left his wife and 2 kids back in Maryland, and it took him, I think, 10 or 12 years to get back to Maryland to his family. And the really cool part of the book is when he finally got back to Maryland, his wife and 2 kids had been stolen and taken south into slavery. And here we have a narrative of Henry Bibb. We have the narrative, the slave narrative of Frederick Douglass, My Bondage and My Freedom. Another great piece in this case is the Fugitive Slave Bill from 1854. And it denoted that if a slave ran away and went north, that the people who owned him could go and bring him back. And that was signed by Millard Fillmore in 1854. Another great piece in here is the slave, which is a larger printout of it up there with the whelps on his back to show you kind of what slave life was like in the mid-1860s. Alabama period to the Civil War period from 1861 to 1865. We have the Fort Pillow Massacre, which was a battle that took place that when the black troops and the white troops were overwhelmed by the Confederate soldiers, they attempted to surrender and they were all massacred. Harper's Weekly was a publication that came out once a week, and it was kind of like the USA Today of today. They didn't have photographs there, so they made engravings of different scenes and different aspects of the war. And here we have some black contraband digging a trench in Vicksburg, who were being hired by the, well, not hired, but the Confederate soldiers had them to do that. We have another black soldier who is being edged on to shoot a cannon with a Confederate soldier kind of like holding a gun on him. And we get to the case and we have engravings of black soldiers when they first mustered in, and they're kind of like their rags, and then you have a dignified soldier with a uniform on. I know most of you have heard of the movie Glory. Well, this is the book that kind of was about the movie, The Brave Black Regiment. It was a story about the fighting 54th of Massachusetts. This photograph here is a later print of an actual black Civil War troop, which is a very important photograph. And these are pages from the Harper Weeklies from 1864 depicting slaves or contraband, which they would call at the time, joining up with the Union troops and kind of following the Union troops as they marched through the South. And these are black soldiers, maybe black slaves also being liberated. Now we're into to the Reconstruction period, which started in 1865 after the Civil War, and ran up probably until like the 1870s, late 1870s, which was a time when blacks were so-called free, and they were trying to make a life for themselves in the United States. And when you're a slave and you've always worked for someone and you really don't know anything about being free, it's a very difficult transition. And African Americans had a very difficult time during this period because there was a lot of backlash toward African Americans being free. A lot of people, North and South, didn't particularly want that, but they was emancipated in 1863, so it was just like the law of the land. This is a book which documents the testimony of African Americans in Mississippi, done by the government to document the Ku Klux Klan intimidation of black people after the Civil War and during Reconstruction. This broadside is a very important piece of Iowa history. It's announcing a white men's rally, mass meeting in the park in Jefferson County, which is Fairfield, Iowa. And this was given to me by well, it wasn't given to me, it was almost like a gift. The lady charged me virtually nothing for it. It had been her family for over 100 years. Her father, her great-grandfather was very much into Iowa politics and probably actually attended that meeting. And it's announcing a meeting in the park to support President Johnson's Reconstruction policies and the opposition to Negro suffrage. And I did a little research, and in 1865, it was only 1,500 black people living in Iowa, so I doubt if we'd have been a great voting bloc back then, but that was the sentiment of the time. You really didn't, most people really didn't want African Americans to participate in the political system. This book here is a documentation by William Steels of the Underground Railroad, which gives a story of different slaves who fled the South and went through the Underground Railroad on their trek to the northern cities and to Canada. And you have, I think, 23 different stories of actual slaves and their plight and running away from the plantation and seeking freedom up north and in Canada. Now we're approaching the Jim Crow period, which was a very dark period in African American history. Right after the Civil War, we had Reconstruction, which blacks were given a certain amount of autonomy. They even had rights to vote, and there was a few elected black officials throughout the South. Well, after this, it was kind of a rollback, and that began the Jim Crow era, where a lot of these laws were turned back. A lot of these politicians who had won public office were kicked out virtually, and that began a period where the Ku Klux Klan was in its heyday. And it was a very difficult period in the lives of African Americans in this country. A lot of things came out during that time which depicted black African Americans in very stereotypical views. You had toys coming out at that time, advertisement, books, and all sorts of things that would depict African Americans in a very derogatory way. So that really influenced the masses who had probably never ever came in contact with African Americans to kind of take them as not to take them serious. So that hampered a great deal of our autonomy to become equal in the United States of America and to contribute to society. Here we have a Paul Jones whiskey advertising from I think 1898, and it depicts a black woman with a watermelon in her hand and a black man with whiskey in his hand. So it was those comical images that kind of like were the images of the day. And amongst the negative images, the thing that really is great about this exhibit is that you can see the actual African Americans that was living at that particular time, and they're dignified people. They held down jobs. They were well dressed. A lot were educated. So we were a people that were trying to do our best to fit into American society. But like I say, that time was a dark period, and I think between the years of 1880 and 1900 was the most lynchings of any time during American history. This is a particular important photograph to me. I bought it in Wilton, Iowa back in, I think, 1995 or 96. And a person at the auction asked me, did I know what the photograph was, and I told him I didn't. And he said he thought it was the Wilton Cheese Factory, which has a integrated workforce, and I think this picture was probably around the turn of the century, which goes to show you that the people in Iowa were probably a lot more enlightened than a lot of people in the country, because it's very seldom you see an integrated workforce. Over here is an announcement for the Jubilee Singers to sing in Washington, Pennsylvania. The Jubilee Singers were ex-slaves who went to the Fisk University in Nashville and toured the country singing slave songs and other songs, other religious songs that black people performed at that period. These two pieces of the Three Boys and the Tickled to Death sheet music is a very important collectible. When you get one piece and you can find another piece with the same image on it, that's to a collector, that's a good thing. So that's a very good depiction, a very good piece of my collection. Now this is the self-help period. This is when blacks really, after World War I, we really started to get into culture, art, music, and as you can see, even this lithograph is from the late 1800s, but it depicts minstrel guys who were musicians. And then we have actual photographs of black people that were musicians. This is a Buffalo soldier, probably in some black regiment around the turn of the century up to the 1920s. And these are photographs of just your average black people living at that period, dignified, well-dressed, probably educated. This case, we kind of get into the memorabilia where you have some African-American images which are very derogatory and very stereotypical, but you also have other images that are very normal and lifelike. We have a tobacco jar from Czechoslovakia, which depicts a black man sitting on a bale of cotton. You take the top off and you would store tobacco in it. We have Majelica cigarette holder and match holder from England, and we also have a terracotta statue from Germany, which all these images were depicted in a positive way. We also have, which is a very important piece, a painting on ivory of a Victorian woman and a slave, which is the only one that I've ever seen, and it's really, really a rare piece. And then again, you have the figurine, which is states "Vote Women, Suffragette," and that's Sojourner Truth, image of Sojourner Truth, and that was, I think that was made in approximately the early 1900s, and stamped Germany on the bottom, because she fought for African American rights and women's rights. And then we have the various games. We have the Coontown Shooting Gallery, which is from the early 1900s. We have the Three Black Kids cigar box, which is from the early 1900s. And you have my great book, Watermelon Peach, which was the book that started this whole collection. And these things are not really historically significant, but they're great images of the time to show the way that black people were used to sell toys, to sell advertising. And of course we have the Green River Whiskey Charger, which was used in taverns when you would walk around and bring beers to the patrons in the tavern. They would put them on this oversized tray. And we have the Poor Little Moe's book, which is done by the great cartoonist Outcoat, who also did the Buster Brown cartoon. So we're passing through different periods, and I hope to show you the contrast between the negative images and the positive images of African Americans who actually lived at that time. This is a minstrel poster from the late 1800s, which depicts a minstrel band, when in itself is a very rare image, because I've seen many minstrel posters, not in real life, but in books, and this is the only minstrel band that I've ever seen. And I obtained that from a collector in Oklahoma through a trade. I think when I traded him a very, very good book for the poster, but I since learned that the book was not worth as much as the poster, so I think I did okay. This is a noble black family, and I think this family was from somewhere in Iowa because I got this picture in Iowa, and the story behind it was that a guy that was living in Iowa, storage space got sold off, and this particular photograph was in it. Somebody knew the guy and gave me his name, and I tried to contact him, but I never got a hold of him to find out if he wanted to photograph or not, so here it is. This book is one of the most important books in my collection. It's called the Clifton Conference, and what it is it's a tabulation and a array of every high school, middle school, orphanage, and grade school in the United States that was run by African Americans in the year 1910. And it has numerous photos and illustrations of Tuskegee Institute, Hampton, Fisk University. All the black major schools in the country at the time were in this book. And we have Putting the Most into Life by Booker T. Washington. And we also have The Negro, a Beast, or In the Image of God, which is one of the most racist books in my collection. It calls Negroes beasts, and it gives an argument why they're not human. The book right beneath it is an answer to The Negro of a Beast, done by another religious guy, which kind of answers the first book and debunks it. These are various photographs of, this is, I think, is a classroom, probably somewhere in Iowa or Illinois, and you have 4 black students in it. You have a musician here. You have a family here, which I got this photograph, I think, in Burlington. And matter of fact, it was 2 photographs. This one and another one with the same family in front of the same house, maybe 10 years apart. And I think this is the second one, showing the house that's kind of weather-worn, and it seemed like the gentleman's got kind of older, and he's not keeping the house up as good as he did when he was a young guy. Here we have books by Paul Laurence Dunbar, one of the great poets of the Renaissance period, and this is a ledger of a church that began in Terre Haute, Indiana in 1902, and it has all the founding fathers and notations of different club meetings and different offerings and different things that they were trying to accomplish during that period. And this church was started by ex-slaves, because in the year 1900, and if you have elders in this book that was 55 and 60 years old, then undoubtedly they were slaves at some period in their lives. And these are just photographs of well-dressed, noble black people who were living in the United States at that time. This wall is kind of dedicated to World War I soldiers. What's really weird about this wall is, like, this is a World War I troop of soldiers. And as we know, and as the history books say, the forces was not integrated at that time. I found this photograph at Sharpless auction, and as I was looking through the photograph, I found a black soldier way down here on the end, which is kind of interesting. These are black doughboys. That's black troops in Camp Merritt, New Jersey. These are different posters depicting black soldiers. This is an article in Outlook magazine about the Buffalo Soldiers. This is the honor roll of Iowa for the black soldiers that participated in World War I from Iowa and Johnson County. These are posters depicting soldiers fighting in World War I, Our Colored Heroes, True Sons of Freedom, and Colored Man No Slacker are three of five posters that are sought after. I have 3 of them. I'm trying to find another 2, which is very difficult to do. This is another black soldier. So yeah, we did participate in every war that America had, and our soldiers fought just as valiantly as any soldiers in the World War I. This is a turn-of-the-century shoe shine stand, and it has special significance to me. Growing up in Gary, Indiana, in the late 50s and 60s, My first job was as a shoe shine boy. I worked at Trick's Shoe Shine Parlor on 25th Avenue, right between Washington and Broadway. And the shine stand that I worked on was a little different than this. It had 4 chairs instead of just one. But the common denominator in the stand that I worked on in this stand is that you had the linoleum, which protected the wood over time. And that's what really drew me to this particular shine stand. I bought it in Clinton, Iowa, probably 6 or 7 years ago. And it sat in my basement all this time until its exhibit when I brought it out to display it and let other people see it. These are different photographs of people from the 1920s. You have 2 nicely dressed women. You have one of the best pieces in my collection, a Winchester poster, which is advertising, depicting 2 black hunters shooing a skunk out of a log, and the caption around the Winchester poster is, Winchester's loaded shooting shells, shoot them and avoid trouble. In other words, we got to shoot these skunks and avoid trouble, because we know what'll happen if we don't shoot them. Here we have photographs of African Americans. This particular one is from Eddiesville, Iowa, which was a mining town in central Iowa. Still in existence, but this is a photograph of the main street, and you got 2 black kids walking down the main street. I think it looks probably a little bit different now. This is a pretty rare object. It's a cotton sack, which African Americans wore in the South when they was picking cotton. This sack is actually, I think, 9 feet long, and you kind of drape it over your shoulder, and you drug it behind you as you took the balls of cotton out and put it in the sack. This is a black cowboy, which a lot of people don't know that 1/3 of the cowboys that won the West were black. You know, we don't hear about that in the history books, but it's an actual fact that a lot of cowboys, a lot of blacks after slavery, went out west seeking jobs and freedom, and a lot of them became cowboys and helped win the West. This is a photograph of, I would like to think it's a sheriff because he has a gun. So I would like to think he was a sheriff. He's a very nobly dressed, and he's kind of like he's got some type of uniform coat on because it has decorations on the sleeve. This is the only piece in my collection that's not an authentic artifact. It is what you call a fantasy piece. It is a glass sign saying colored waiting room and for North Carolina and St. Louis Railroad. When I first purchased it back in 1992, I actually thought it was real until I did a little research and found out that there was no North Carolina and St. Louis Railroad. But it's such a good image that depicts the things that went on during that time that I decided to keep it. So it's not an actual artifact, but it is a piece depicting a time in history when signs like that were commonplace in the South. This case is filled with memorabilia, which when I first started collecting was one of my great passions because I was into the toys, the memorabilia, the books, because when you first start collecting, that's most of everything that you see. The real historical stuff came later after I matured. But we have a Sambo clock, we have a Sambo book, we have a little tin toy called a Charleston Trio. You wind it up and the little guys dance, just like a minstrel would dance. And then you got the Alabama Coon Jigger. And over here we have advertising, which blacks were used in advertising around the turn of the century, all up into the 1930s, tremendously. We have the nigger hair tobacco tin, and then you have the bigger hair tobacco tin, which was after 1932, the company who produced this in Wisconsin changed the name because they were trying to be politically correct. We have the Dixie Kid cut plug tobacco tin, and one of my favorite toys is the Clippo Lucifer marionette, and that was put out by the Marshall Fields Company, and I found that particular one up in Coggan, Iowa, and it came in the original box with the original little button in his shirt, which was it's a very good piece. Then we have photographs of African Americans, and the one up in the top with the guy getting on the horse is my grandfather, Jim Hicks, who lived in Lexington, Mississippi, and owned a farm down there. Very noble man. Here, this photograph, which was a UPI photograph of President Roosevelt and George Washington Carver. I think it might have been on a trip to Tuskegee. And then we have a Pullman porter who was, that was one of the best jobs that an African American could get during the 30s, 40s, and 50s. I had an uncle that was a Pullman porter, as a matter of fact. Here we have a case kind of dedicated to the Harlem Renaissance. We have a book by Langston Hughes with the inscription, inscribed especially for the Community Church Center with sincere regards of Langston Hughes, March 1946, which is one of my best books, and Langston Hughes was a great author. We have Colors by Conti Cullen. We have Soul of Black Folks by W.E. Du Bois. We have Speeches by Booker T. Washington. We have a World War II marching band of African American soldiers. We have a photograph from Buxton, Iowa, which was a very sought after photograph. Buxton, Iowa was a town in the early 1900s, I think up to the 1930s, that was probably 50% black. And black people and white people made this town go with hardly any problems. So it was kind of like a town that was totally integrated before most towns were. We have a black policeman. I don't really know where he's from, but we were represented on police forces throughout the North, I think. Up in the left-hand corner, we have a photograph of Richard Wright, and to his left, we have a photograph of Paul Robeson. And both of these photographs were taken by the famous photographer from Cedar Rapids, Carl Van Vechten, has his stamp on the bottom of it. In this case, we have records by Billie Holiday, Erskine Hawkins, and we have a version of Othello starring Paul Robeson. We have the folk art Porgy and Bess, albums by Duke Ellington, Count Basie, and an album by the famous opera singer Marian Anderson. Now we get into the Civil Rights era. We have a photograph of a World War II regiment with a couple of black soldiers in it, and this is from Camp Polk, Louisiana. We have a watercolor painting of a black boy, which I bought in Wellman, Iowa, I think probably during the first month that I was collecting, and I did some research, and the artist is an Iowa artist, and he's listed, which makes the painting that much better. Here we have a minstrel prop and actual photograph of a Lions Club minstrel show in Fairfield, Iowa in 1951, which I think was probably the last depiction of a minstrel show in Iowa. I found no documentation of any minstrel show happening after then, but it's a very important piece of Iowa history. Here we get into the Civil Rights Movement and the different entertainers of that time. We have Ebony magazine from 1953 depicting Nat King Cole and his wife. We have a Sarah Vaughan album. We have the great Louis Armstrong on the cover of a Life magazine. We have a signed photograph of Earl Father Hines, and we have another photograph on the cover of Our World magazine, which is an all-black publication from the 1950s. We have the famous book, which later was a movie, To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, which was, I think, the first and only book that she ever wrote. We have Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. And we have different covers of magazines of Jackie Robinson, Muhammad Ali, Arthur Ashe. This was an assassination of Medgar Evers and his wife on the cover of the Life magazine in 1980. This was a Life magazine cover from, I think, 65 of the Newark riots. This is a book by Elijah Muhammad, who created the Black Muslim movement of the 50s and 60s, and the autobiography of Malcolm X, who was a member of the Black Muslims who split off from from Elijah Muhammad and was later assassinated by some members of the original sect. We have the Ebony magazine cover from 1967 depicting the riots, and we also have a Life magazine depicting the riots of the 60s. And Malcolm X cover for Post magazine in 1964, which is a very sought-after cover. We also have Martin Luther King on a tapestry, which is the only tapestry like that I've ever seen. And I bought it from a dealer in Marion at a very reasonable price. We have a wanted poster for Eldridge Cleaver, who was one of the original founders of the Black Panther Party, who has since passed away a couple of years ago. And we have a Newsweek magazine cover from 1968 depicting the funeral of Martin Luther King. And of course we have the famous Life magazine photograph of his wife in 1968 at his funeral. And this speech is the Great March on Washington speech. And these books are two of the 5 books that Martin Luther King wrote. This particular document here is a document signed by J. Edgar Hoover on Department of Justice stationery. He criticized Martin Luther King after Martin Luther King criticized the FBI about not really working to find the killers of the 3 civil rights workers in 1964. And this was a reporter from Cedar Falls and asked J. Edgar Hoover about his criticism of King a couple of weeks after King was assassinated. This particular area is dealing with the Black Power movement of the 60s and 70s. We have Angela Davis, who was a fugitive for a couple of 2 or 3 years after she was accused of participating in a jail escape in California of George Jackson, which he was later killed, and she was later tried, but she was found innocent. This is the notorious Donald David DeFreeze. Most people know him as Sim Q. He was part of the band of the SLA who kidnapped Patty Hearst in the mid-70s, and later he was killed in a house out in California when they cornered the group in a rundown section of Los Angeles and burned the house down with him and I think 3 or 4 other members of the SLA in it. This is Jesse Jackson. Everybody knows Jesse. He's been a civil rights worker since the 60s and 70s. And this is another guy, H. Rap Brown, who was a founder of the Black Panther Party, who has since been incarcerated for shooting the police in Georgia. And I think he's doing life in the penitentiary now. This poster is a poster of the movie Malcolm X, which never was released, but I happened to acquire this poster at a poster sale right in our city. This was one poster among hundreds that was just there, and I've never seen another one. But it was actual. I heard it was actual movie that was never released, and it was based on the autobiography of Malcolm X written by Alex Haley. This is a poster from a blaxploitation film called Superfly. Beside him you have a jet issue with Muhammad Ali on the cover and another actual photograph of Muhammad Ali, a print of Muhammad Ali. And the baseball player is Lou Brock. Here has a copy of a Black Panther newspaper from 1973. We have a book by Eldridge Cleaver. We have Geraldine, who was Flip Wilson's alter ego, I guess. We have an album by Richard Pryor and speeches by Malcolm X. We also have Hue and Cry by James McPherson, who is a Iowa author and who lives right in Iowa City. And I think he signed that book for me too. Well, now we're into the area of 1980 up into 2004, which African American history now is still being written every day. This is a particular poster which was Spike Lee's first movie, which my brother was a star of it. This was done as his thesis for Columbia University. The title of the movie was Joe's Bed-Stuy Barbershop. This is a painting that I acquired in Rock Island by a noted black artist. The sign above it is the affirmative action sign that hung on the door of 201 at the University of Iowa Affirmative Action Department. Then we have a photograph of the Globetrotters. We have books by James Baldwin. We also have a book by O.J. Simpson. My Brother's Keeper. We also have The Color Purple. Many people saw that movie by Alice Walker. And we have a book by Toni Morrison, also signed by Toni Morrison, Beloved, the movie that, the book was made into a movie by Oprah Winfrey. And we have books by Bill Cosby and Alex Haley. We also have a book, Moonwalk, by Michael Jackson, which depicts his life in the entertainment field, which that book is still being written right now because we don't know how Michael's going to turn out. Matter of fact, Michael Jackson was from my hometown. I played on the same Little League team with his brother. Michael was just a little guy during that time, but I remember his brother as the guy on our team who struck out the most. And that's the truth. This is a Harlem Globetrotter pinball machine that I bought at Sharper's Auction, I think about 8 years ago. And I was fascinated by it because I'd never seen it before. And it played wonderfully, so I ended up getting it for a very reasonable price. I took it home, and at the time, my son was about 9, and my daughter was about 10, so they played on it every day. I had to fix the electronics on it so that you wouldn't have to put any money on it, so you could just press a button and it would play. And they broke a few flippers and had a few fights over it, so I ended up taking it and putting it in the garage. But it's the only black pinball machine that I've ever seen. So it's really a neat piece. I'd like to thank you for viewing the tour. It's been a fascinating experience for me working with the Hoover Museum, who are great, fantastic people. As you can see, this is a search of one collector's experience of African American history, and I hope that you, wherever you are, will look into your history and find some things that you might want to save and to put aside. But again, this has been the love of my life, and I hope that you get a fraction of the satisfaction out of it as I've gotten for the last 13 plus years. So, thank you.